On July 28, 1977, Travis Victor Alexander was born in Riverside, California, the son of Gary and Pamela Alexander. Travis's early years were marred by tragedy. At age 11, an unstable and ultimately toxic home life meant that Travis would be forced to go and live with his paternal grandparents. And after his father's tragic death in mid-1997, he was followed by his 7 brothers and sisters. Despite his rough upbringing, Travis performed rather well in school, attending college and eventually getting a job with a company known as Prepaid Legal Services as a salesman, and later as the company's motivational speaker, a position that paid considerably better. As part of his job at PPL, Travis would often attend conferences that took place in Las Vegas, plying his trade as a motivational speaker in front of audiences of hundreds. During one such conference in September of 2006, there was one particular woman in the audience who was enraptured by Travis's charisma and his talent for public speaking. She approached him afterwards, introducing herself and striking up a conversation that would spark off a long-term friendship. This woman's name was Jodi Arias. Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to a mother of European ancestry and a father of Mexican ancestry. After she met Travis at the PPL conference, the pair grew increasingly close, which led to Jodi converting to Mormonism just 2 months later, actually being baptized by Travis himself at a ceremony that took place in Southern California. Despite the distance between them, the pair then began dating a few months later, and Jodi even took the steps to move to Mesa and then Yreka, California, living in her grandparents' place so she could be closer to Travis. Travis and Jodi had a tumultuous, on and off again relationship for almost a year and a half, often forced to maintain a long-distance relationship due to the fact that one of them lived in Arizona, while the other had to remain in California for work. This kind of distance would put a strain on any relationship, but it appeared there were other factors at work that made Jodi and Travis's relationship less than healthy. From the very first time that Travis introduced Jodi to his close friends, they seemed to take an instant dislike to her. Jodi didn't seem in the least bit keen to impress or ingratiate herself to them, seeming generally disinterested in anyone but Travis. His friends detected a kind of jealousy to her, how she seemed to act overly possessive of Travis, yet at the same time didn't seem to show him much affection either. From the get-go, they found Jodi's behavior worrying, even frightening. Shortly after Jodi moved into her grandparents' home in Yreka, she and Travis arranged to accompany one another on a week-long work-related trip to Cancun, down in Mexico. The trip was scheduled for June 15th, and the couple intended to make something of a vacation out of it. However, not long after, Travis reportedly went to company HQ to request that his travel companion be changed to another member of the sales team. There has been much speculation regarding why exactly this is, but our best guess is to assume that it involved a breakdown in his and Jodi's relationship. Then on May 28th, Jodi called Travis in a state of distress. She told him there had been a burglary at her grandparents' place, where she was staying, and felt so unsafe that she begged to come and stay with him for a while. The burglars had apparently stolen a number of valuable items during the break-in, but perhaps the most significant was a .25 caliber Colt pistol which had belonged to her grandfather. Police had no luck finding the perpetrators, and eventually gave up looking altogether, as they couldn't seem to find a single shred of evidence that might give them a clue to the identity of any of the people involved. In the face of Jodi begging to stay with him, Travis straight up refused. This is perhaps the best evidence we have that their pair had broken up by that point. If Travis loved her or had any feelings at all for her, surely he would have offered her a place to stay. Only he didn't. Or maybe it was the case that Travis did love her, but something else was stopping him from inviting her over. It's possible that there have been many another woman in Travis's life. However, it's also possible that Travis didn't invite Jodi over because he was afraid of her. Jodi called Travis yet again on June 2nd, repeatedly attempting to reach him between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., but her cell phone records show that, since the longest call was a mere 17 seconds, he apparently didn't pick up the phone. Then, just after 3 in the morning, Travis called Jodi back, and the pair engaged in a lengthy conversation. We have no idea what was said during the call, but we do know that at around 5:30 that same morning, Jodi drove over to a car rental place over in Redding, California, entering the business shortly after it opened at 8 a.m. She told the clerk that she wished to use the car for the long drive to Utah for a work-related trip, and then drove it to visit a few friends on her way to Utah, where she would meet up with a fellow PPL employee by the name of Ryan Burns. Yet Jodi didn't show up to meet Ryan until late in the evening on June 3rd, leaving a sizable amount of time to be accounted for that day. And when she did show up in the West Jordan suburb of Salt Lake City to meet up with Ryan Burns, her colleague noticed some unusual things about her. Firstly, he saw that her normally dyed blonde hair was now brown, but not its natural shade of brown, and that she seemed to have cuts or scratches all over her hands. Jodi also refused to let him near the rental car, insisting that they take his car to the PPL business conference. Naturally, Ryan thought this behavior was unusual, but the pair had more important things to think about, as the conference would keep each of them occupied for the majority of the day. Ryan had another reason to keep quiet about such unusual behavior, and that's because he and Jodi had begun something of a love affair during their time in Utah, with the two spending several hours hugging and kissing on a large beanbag chair at the place that they were staying. Jodi also reassured him about the cuts on her hands by telling him that she had gotten them while working part-time at a Mexican restaurant in the Wairika area, an excuse that seemed good enough for him to quiet his suspicions. Once their business was adjourned, Jodi departed from Salt Lake City on June the 6th, driving back westward towards California. Her cell phone records showed that she attempted to call Travis several times, leaving a handful of voicemails, yet she apparently also found a way to access this voicemail system. Why exactly she chose to do so is still a matter of conjecture, but we can all agree that it constitutes some rather unusual behavior. When she returned the rental car to the outlet in Redding, the clerk began to inspect the interior as a matter of routine. It is then that he too noticed something unusual. The vehicle was missing its floor mats on the driver and passenger side. There were also some kind of stains on the upholstery, as if some thick liquid had been spilled and then left to dry. However, since the upholstery was black and the color of said liquid was not visible, no suspicions were raised among the staff at the car rental outlet, and the interior was clean before it could be inspected by anyone of any importance. Meanwhile, a few days prior, Travis's employers had tried to contact him for a conference call, only to have their calls unanswered. The same pattern repeated itself for a few days, with friends and colleagues calling only for Travis to not pick up his phone. By June 9th, as a handful of Travis's friends were beginning to worry amongst themselves regarding his well-being, they agreed to go over to his home to check up on him. They spoke to a few of the other tenants who lived in the same building as Travis did, and found that they had not seen him in a few days. But since he traveled for work frequently, they didn't seem to think that there was anything to worry about. However, one of Travis's neighbors was in possession of a spare key to his apartment, which Travis has entrusted them with on the off chance he should ever lose his keys. The concerned group of friends proceeded to unlock the door to Travis's apartment, calling out his name as they entered. Then one of them froze with a sharp gasp, pointing to a pool of congealed blood that sat in the hallway in Travis's bedroom. In a panic, they began to search the apartment for him, eventually being greeted by the sight of his days-old corpse, which was lying in the bathtub, covered in blood. His friends cried and screamed as they called 911, but they did not attempt to revive him, as it was obvious from the state of his dead body that he had been deceased for a while. During the 911 call that followed the discovery, a police dispatcher asked if Travis had potentially thought about ending his own life, or if his friends knew of anyone who may have been threatening his life. His friends immediately mentioned Jodi Arias, his ex-girlfriend, as a possible suspect in his murder. He said that, in the days prior to his death, Travis had mentioned that Jodi had been stalking him, accusing him of seeing someone else, and seemed to be in some kind of jealous rage. This psychopathic jealousy had led her to begin attempting to access his Facebook account, and even going so far as slashing his car's tires. When investigating police arrived at Travis's home, they commenced an intense search for any evidence or clues as to the identity of his killer. One of the most curious things they discovered was a recently purchased digital camera in the washing machine. Despite a large amount of water damage, police were able to recover the camera's memory card and found on it a number of photographs which someone had apparently attempted to delete. These photographs showed Travis and Jodi in numerous suggestive poses taken on the afternoon of June 4th. The final photograph in the series was taken at 5:39 p.m. that same day and showed Travis alive and well while he was taking a shower. In it, he was smiling playfully, completely naked, a candid depiction of the man's final moments. As another photograph, taken just minutes later, showed Travis bleeding profusely while lying on the bathroom floor. DNA samples were taken from bloody handprints found in the bathroom, which gave police all the evidence they needed to arrest a suspect, as they contained not only Travis's DNA, but Jodi Arias's too. After being indicted for first-degree murder by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Jodi was arrested at her home in California and then extradited to Arizona on September 5, 2008. Less than a week later, she pled not guilty, giving several different accounts of her alleged involvement in Travis's death. At first, she told investigating police officers that she was nowhere near Arizona on the day her ex-boyfriend was murdered. Then, after pressure from the cops, she admitted she was present at the time of his death, but that it had involved a home invasion, whereby two individuals broke into Travis's residence before killing him and attacking her in turn. 2 years of investigation later, Jodi then changed her story entirely, telling the police that she had indeed killed Travis, but had only done so in self-defense. She spun a tale of brutal domestic violence, how she was a victim of a cruel and violent man, and how she regularly feared for her life around him. At her trial in February of 2013, Jodi told the jury that she had been physically and emotionally abused by her parents, and that her life with Travis had echoed that same cycle of abuse and guardianship, one that she wanted to escape from, but couldn't quite bring herself to. She went on to describe the abusive type of life that Travis subjected her to, one that included a great deal of BDSM and other painful acts, most of which were in direct violation of the Mormon rules regarding such things. Jodi also had recorded a phone conversation that she had with Travis, one that she used as evidence to prove that at one point Travis had wanted to use zip ties to tie her to a tree while she was dressed as Little Red Riding Hood. Jodi is heard to respond enthusiastically on the phone, but told the court it was all an act, that the idea terrified her, and was typical of the kinds of things that Travis wanted to do. Jodi also mentioned that Travis had admitted to find underage children attractive, basically painting him to be a complete monster. However, the prosecution argued that Jodi was a vengeful, vindictive person who had only recorded the phone conversation in an attempt to blackmail Travis and embarrass him in front of his Mormon peers. The prosecution also questioned a forensic expert before the jury, prompting them to say that there had been a thorough examination of Travis's computer, one in which absolutely had no evidence of child pictures found, nor were there any references to anything intimate with children. Rebuttal witnesses from the prosecution also included several of Travis's other girlfriends, who stated he never exhibited any problems with anger or violence. Clinical psychologist Janine DeMarthe testified for the prosecution, stating that she found no evidence that Travis had ever abused Jodi. DeMarthe also said that Jodi suffered from borderline personality disorder, showing signs of immaturity and an unstable sense of identity. The final nail in Jodi's legal coffin was the prosecution telling the jury that a single .25 caliber bullet casing was found near Travis's body, the same caliber of the gun that was stolen from her grandparents' place just a week before the murder. As it turns out, Jodi had faked the entire burglary just to obtain the murder weapon, which not only showed that she was a dangerous psychopath, willing to hurt those close to her to achieve her goals, but that she had actually been planning to kill Travis for quite some time. After the trial, that had reportedly cost the U.S. taxpayer over $3 million, the jury found Jodi guilty of first-degree murder, and she only narrowly avoided the death penalty when a judge essentially took pity on her mental illness, sentencing her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She was also ordered to pay Travis's siblings over $30,000 in damages. As of 2016, Jodi is housed at Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville, and her case and trial have been the subject of a great deal of social media interest, with even Donald Trump commenting on what he called her obvious guilt.